Don't get banned from your banner lords. Hello everyone, it's Bront CatHerder here. We're having fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we're here to talk about the banner lords and derping your way through faction wars. What is derping, you might ask? Derping is the method of using damage, enhancers, revivers, and protectors to identify champions that you want to use and build a team for clearing faction wars. Now, obviously, the goal is to finish Faction Wars 21 and finish that with 3 stars, but along the way, you may have to build some of these other champions as well. So it's a good time to examine some of these champions, look at some of the roles they fill, and look into building a team. So with that, let's go take a look at the rares that are in the Bannerlords. There are quite a few Bannerlord rares, and honestly, very few of them are any good. A couple of them are usable. Certainly, some of the voids are usable early on. Honestly, any of them are usable early on. If you find you're enjoying using some of them, you could certainly keep them around for a little bit. But as far as functionality goes, there's not a lot of really good usable champions for later on in the faction. Dagger is a very good champion for the faction. There's not a lot of enhancers, and Dagger provides a decent amount of damage as well as a decreased defense, which is sorely needed outside of one other champion for this faction. Valerie is also a very good champion. Valerie does some buff extension and some cleansing and shielding and some healing. Not the greatest, but she's a farmable rare, so she's very easy to book if you don't have a lot of rare books. And honestly, early on, she can provide a lot of healing. I've actually used her to clear 21, same with Dagger. So they can actually be effective champions late into the faction run, but they're probably not your end game goal for that. Valerie can also be used in some clan boss teams if you desperately need some buff extension. Buff extension is actually very powerful, so Valerie is certainly worth looking at and building if you need her, especially early on. She can certainly help you in faction wars, so keeping a copy of her early on, not bad. And Bannerlords being one of the OG factions, much like Sacred Order, they are packed to the gills with epics and legendaries as well. Now, not every epic is great. There are some epics that are not particularly good. Some of them are controversial. I know Seneschal, for example, is popular with some creators, but I have never liked his kit and never found him particularly useful. But if you need a protector, he can do some provoking for you. But as far as damage is concerned, Archmage Helmet is a guaranteed champ if you should be grinding Doom Tower and do some of the secret rooms as much as you can. Now, you don't necessarily need to focus on Doom Tower, but do the secret rooms, do as many of them as you can early on. Don't necessarily spend a lot of resources doing them extra, but certainly try to get what you can get done, and eventually you'll get an Archmage Helmet. Maybe 6 months in, maybe 9 months in. Archmage Helmet is a good damage dealer. He is also a good protector. He does a very solid stun, and he does a decent amount of damage, and he does some AoE damage and hits as well. Overall, he's a very good champion. He also provides an awful lot of buffing for you, including some increased speed. He can be very useful in some of the early Seer wave clear teams as well. In fact, he used to be one of the more popular picks with his 3 buffs that he would put up. Overall, he's a very good champion. You'll certainly grow out of using him, but he's a very good champion overall and is actually does a surprising amount of damage. So building him is actually well worth it. One of the MVPs of this faction is Stag Knight. Stag Knight is one of the original decreased defense AoE champions that also does decrease attack. His kit's very simple. He does that for an AoE on his A2, and his A1 is a decreased speed double hitter. Very useful even in hard Fire Knight. He's a great champion, well worth building. He can be built to do a ton of damage. He'll also save you taking a ton of damage with the decreased defense, meaning you can kill champions easier, and with the decreased attack, meaning that you're going to take a lot less damage overall from your enemies. So Stag is well worth building. He also provides an increased accuracy buff if you miss placing a debuff. So he can actually help you have slightly lower accuracy on some champions if you're struggling to get the accuracy on a few of them. So overall, Stag's a great champion, well worth building, and I mentioned him as a damage dealer and a protector because he can do both fairly well. He's also an enhancer because he's got the decreased defense, and again, one of only really two in the epics. The other enhancer that's worth bringing up is Ulfrig. Some people call him the accountant or Colin from marketing. I've heard his nickname before. He's one of the plainest champions you'll see in Raid, even though he's actually a fairly new champion. But he's got some increased turn meter, he's got some increased attack, he's got some decrease attack, and he can actually do some buff stripping as well. He is a very good champion for Faction Wars. He's not a great champion, he's not going to be in a lot of your dungeon teams, but he brings a lot of utility. And honestly, early on, he could end up in some of your dungeon teams because he does bring a lot of utility, and turn meter control can be super, super helpful. And he's also got a good aura because I believe it's a speed in all battles aura as well. So offering is very good. Back to damage. Lady Quillen can hit pretty hard. She was a free champion in a couple of giveaways. I think there's some codes to get her as well. She's not the greatest damage dealer, but she can do a decent amount of damage as a force champion that can be helpful, especially early on. She's also worth building to 50, even if you don't book her or anything like that, because she's part of the Lady Mikage fusion. So you're going to want to keep one of her for a while. And you might as well, if you have to gear her and build her for 50 to get Faction Wars done while you're farming for Mikage, that's well worth it. Rowan is a single target damage dealer, can actually do quite a bit of damage against the clan boss, brings a lot of poisons, can hit fairly hard. Very, very good damage dealer. Also does just plain old damage as well. So you build with accuracy, you build with some crit rate and crit damage as well, and you'll do a lot of damage with Rowan. Rowan can be good in clan boss, as I mentioned earlier. Good against the dragon if you need some poisons against the dragon. Not great in a lot of content, but if you're looking for damage, you could do worse than a Rowan. Giscard is an interesting champion. He does provokes. He does some increased defense as well. I've listed him more as a protector, but he actually can smack pretty hard if you build him for damage. And even if you don't build him for damage, just building him for defense so that he can survive will help him do some decent damage. Alaric is worth mentioning. He's not a great damage dealer, but he's got an AoE that can do a decent amount of damage and provide some control with a decreased attack as well. Honestly, you're better off with just a Stag Knight than an Alaric, but if you need some damage early on, and he's one of the few epics you have, you could do worse. Honorable mention to a Gerhard the Stone. He can do decent single target damage. Oathbound as well. I would absolutely avoid building Lordly Legionary. He is one of the, I believe he is the day 90 login champion you get. Maybe he's the day 120. I don't remember. But he is a really bad champion. He is worth more as a chicken than he is worth as an actual champion. His claim to fame is he's got a triple hit A1, but there's so many champions that have a triple hit A1. It's not a useful champion. His kit's not useful for Fire Knight, which is where he's designed, and he's not useful for damage, and so I would avoid building him at all costs if I could. As far as revivers are concerned, Ursula is the only epic reviver. The revivers are a little iffy in this faction. Ursula not being super accessible because she is a Void epic, but she has a great revive. I believe 75% turn meter for an AoE revive that also puts strengthen on all the champions. So she's got a very good revive. She's got a 30% in Doom Tower aura, so she can be very useful in Doom Tower early on. She can provide some decreased attack as well, so she can provide some additional protection. She does not provide a lot of healing, but she also has some turn meter control if you build her with some accuracy as well on her A1. Overall, a very good champion. You'll find some use for her in other content in the game, particularly in Doom Tower, as I mentioned before. She is worth building if you need a reviver in this faction. And, you know, it always helps to have a reviver in the factions. Other protectors, I mentioned Ulfring and Archmage and Stag. Lady A can be used as a protection. Lady Annabelle, she has some ally protection. She's got some revive on death. She also has some leeches, so she can help you heal as well. And she's pretty easy to stay alive. She is actually a good champion to hold on to because she can solo Bommel, which is usually a struggle for a lot of people. She needs really good gear for it. So you're going to need a lot of immortal and regeneration gear to do that. Although early on, you probably can do it with just a little bit of immortal gear. But because she stays alive particularly well, and you might be building her for Bommel, you might as well use her for faction wars for a while until you can find somebody better. So definitely worth looking into. Warcaster has an AoE block damage. He can be used in some unkillable clan boss teams. It's not the greatest one. I believe it's only for 1 turn on a 4-turn cooldown, but he provides block damage, which can really save you, especially if you can time it right against the boss and against some of the waves. So he is worth looking into or holding on to. He does get power crept fairly quickly because you have champions that do the block damage better in champions like Demitha for unkillable teams, or some of the legendaries that do it for 2 turns, such as your Helikath or your Roshkard the Tower. So overall, Warcaster is not a bad champion to have. I would certainly stash one away if I pulled him. Again, it's a void epic, so that's not too bad. Overall, though, he can be a little hard to use, and and so it really depends on who you've got for your team. I already mentioned Giscard with the provokes, and I should mention Oathbound as well. Oathbound's got some shieldage and decrease attack, as well as he can do a little bit of damage as well. He's not the greatest damage dealer, but he's got some damage potential. But honestly, if you're looking at the epics here, Archmage is a guaranteed champion you're eventually going to get. So he's well worth building and booking, and you'll use him for quite a while. And then Stag Knight is an absolute must build if you pull a Stag Knight. And I say this as you should build him and build a team around Stag, which I absolutely would. I could not pull a Stag Knight by the time I finished this faction as well, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. Spoilers, sorry. But, sometimes you can't get the champion you want, but it is definitely worth trying to build a team around Stag, because he does so much for you, it'll make it building easier. Bannerlords have a lot of legendaries. There's a lot of them worth talking about. First of all, there's a couple of champions that are very limited access. So Quintus is only available if you can get to the end of Gold 2 into Gold 3 live arena. So he is not likely going to be somebody you're going to be dealing with in Faction Wars, because if you're getting in Gold Arena, you've figured out Faction Wars by then. Aislinn is one of the faction guardians. He's very difficult to get, so there's a good chance you're not going to have him. He's not impossible. They run events for him, but you can only get him when they run the events for him. So, at least as of this video, he's not going to be easily and readily available for you. Blade Master, he was a free champion they gave away as part of the Monster Hunter partnership, and he's a great champion. If you happen to have one, he'll do a lot of damage for you and brings a lot of support, particularly against the bosses. He's a boss slayer. He's a damage dealer. He's got a little bit of extra tank ability into him. He is a great champion, and you can't pull him anymore. And that also brings up Rhonda, who was a limited release champion as well. Rhonda, as in Ronda Rousey. Yes, that's her. She's a great champion. You'll find her in live arenas sometimes. You'll find her doing damage all over the place. She brings a lot of extra attack. She's really good in Fire Knight, and she can't not be pulled anymore at the moment. So you're going to have trouble getting a Rhonda as well. So with that out of the way, that's actually 4 champions that you really are not going to have easy access to. That's kind of surprising for this faction. Damage. There's a couple of really good damage dealers here. Stultus can be an arena nuker, and he's a defense-based champion, so he is super tanky while also doing a lot of damage. He's also really good against the dragon because he throws poisons back at the dragon and anybody that throws poisons at him, and decrease defense and weaken. He's immune to those 3 debuffs, which coincidentally are the debuffs that Draco Morph throws out. Draco Morph being the suit that Stultus is wearing. So, hey, it's lore consistent. That's kind of cool. Sigmund the High Shield is a champion who was a fusion early on when I was playing. He is actually a very good champion. He's very well-rounded, however, so he doesn't really specialize in anything, but he can hit fairly hard. He brings provokes, he brings shields, he brings increased defense. So he brings a lot of support and protection for your team, but he also can be built for some decent damage, which is good. So if you need some damage, he's worth building. You don't necessarily even have to build him to 6-star because as a defense champion, he's already naturally tanky. Now, you're not going to get a lot of damage out of him unless you go to 6-star. But overall, he's a good champion, worth building, worth investing in. He could be useful in Hydra. He's not the greatest champion at any particular location, but he's got enough utility and use. You'll find yourself using a Sigmund off and on, especially early on in an account. Septimus is one of the OG max HP hitters. He is an absolute boss slayer of a champion. His A1 hits really hard. His A2, which is his max HP, is one of the hardest hitting max HPs for a single hit max HP. He has been power crept in the meta for champions, but he's still a very good champion to build if you need damage in the faction. His A1, again, does absolute monster damage. His A2 can hit really hard. If you're worried about him surviving, you can always put him in an HP chest or a defense chest instead of an attack chest, and he'll still do a ton of damage with his max HP against the boss. Overall, good champion, worth building and having. Richtof can bring a decent amount of damage. He brings an awful lot of poisons. He has an AoE A1, which can possibly be used for stunnage, and also does some max HP reduction, so he can actually be very useful against the Scarab boss as well with his base kit. Overall, he's difficult to keep alive because he's squishy, and because you want to build, if you build him for damage, you might struggle to get some of the accuracy. If you go with the high accuracy, you lose out on some of the damage. So he's not the greatest champion to build, but he can be fun. I've used him on my alt. He's a decent champion. If you're looking for damage or you're looking for poisons, he can be very, very helpful for you. As far as the voids are concerned, you've got Baron as an absolute monster of a damage dealer. With his buff, he now has a pure damage AoE, so he ignores 100% of all defense on his AoE on his it's a 4-turn cooldown now, his Sky Piercer, and his A1 does overflow damage. So if he does an A1 into a champion that's almost dying, he will then take that overflow damage, the stuff that he still hadn't used to kill that one champion. He'll crit with it again, and then he'll do it to everybody else on the floor. So he can, with his A1, quite often wipe a wave. Absolutely amazing. He's also got a decent damaging A3, and his A2 block damage or decreased defense, which is not an AoE. The only AoE has is Sky Piercer, is irresistible, and in fact cannot be blocked. So he can place that through blocked damage, when in fact he's the only champion who can do that. So he's very cool. He's well worth building for arena. He's well worth building for wave clearing. If you've got one, build him. He will help carry you through this faction. He's a great champion. Taurus is possibly one of the best nukers in the game. He is one of the 2 best HP nukers, but he's honestly just one of the 2 best nukers in the game. He hits like a truck. He has damage mitigation in addition to the fact he's an HP champion, so he can take a lot of damage anyway. And then he powers himself up based on how many buffs he has on him as well, but he doesn't actually use the buffs. So he powers up very similar to a seer, can actually hit pretty similar to a seer. He also has a stun if you want to build him with some accuracy, and his A1 can do a decent amount of damage as well. He is a beast of a champion. If you pull a Taurus, do a dance, celebrate. He's amazing. He's probably my most wanted champion. Enjoy, because he'll probably carry you through Faction Wars. Damage dealers of note, Helior can also do a bit of damage as well. He's a little harder to build. He's got some weird parts of his kit where he can throw back debuffs at the enemy. He does some damage. He's got a shield, so he can do some protection. I ultimately don't really like Helior's kit. He's okay, he's not great. Technically, you have Lugan who can do some damage as well, but he's really much more of a protector. In fact, we go into his kit. He's got an ally protect on a 3-turn cooldown. He's got an ability to block active skills as well, and then he heals on his A1 based on the damage he does, and it actually does a decent amount of damage. So you can build Lugan for some damage if you need the damage. Otherwise, he's a very solid protector, will help against the boss. Lugan's actually a decent champion now that he's been buffed. He was very bad. He's gotten buffed about a year ago, so he's significantly better than he used to be. We talked about Marishka. Marishka is one of the 3 revivers in the Legendaries. I put an asterisk by her for the reviver because her revive works on a if she dies, she revives everybody else, which is absolutely great in Arena and absolutely great if you have a secondary reviver to pick her up if you're trying to 3-star. If you're not trying to 3-star, then she's amazing and you don't really care. But otherwise, she also brings strengthen. She also brings some massive heals. She brings some cleanses. She's got a very good overall kit. She's a great champion, well worth building. One of the best champions in the game as far as supports go. Very good in arena. Can help you in a lot of other content as well. But she's not the best reviver as a pure reviver. As far as just before we get to all the other revivers, going to the enhancers, you've got Timid. Timid does a lot of buff strippage, which I've listed as an enhancement here because he's one of the best buff strippers in the game. In Arena, he can not strip. He can strip and not trigger sheep because of the way he strips. It's by decreasing the duration of buffs instead. He can do okay-ish damage if you build him for some damage. He pairs with Kaja, so Kaja and him pair very well, and if you have the 2 of them, then you're actually in really good shape. He's not the greatest champion, but he's not bad. He was a fusion, so some of you might actually have him. He's overall pretty useful as an enhancer. Anyway, the revivers, you've got Raglan, who, one of the OG revivers, one of the best revives in the game originally, 100% HP, 75% turn meter on a 2-turn cooldown. It's a single target revive, but she can revive, take another turn, revive, take another turn, revive, take another turn. What kind of holds Raglan back a little bit is her other skill is an AoE heal and cleanse. The heal is based off of her attack, which is a little weird, but she can actually do a decent amount of damage with her A1 if you build her with a lot of attacks. So I go nuts, I guess. Um, Still, I'd build her more for tank and defense, but she does a decent heal even without putting too much into attack, and she does a cleanse with it as well. It's a 4-turn cooldown, so it honestly still needs a buff. And then finally, she's got a 3-hit A1 that will randomly increase the turn meter of 3 different champions by 15%. And don't count that down as being a bad support. That's actually a very helpful 15% turn meter boost. Now, it makes tuning her hard because it's a random 3 champions. It could even be her. But overall, it's still a great A1. It's very good for utility. I find I use Raglan in a lot of content where I don't want to be landing debuffs. I don't want to be using buffs, but I need the revive and I need the heal and I need the cleanse. So she's a great champion still. She could be a little bit better. She has a nice aura too. It's a defense aura that's everywhere in the world, so that's great. Then the other reviver is Kaja. Kaja's got a probably a more utilitarian revive. It's a 50% HP and turn meter to all allies. She also has some cleansing involved. She's got some decent support. I believe she's got a little bit of healing that she can throw out there as well. Kaja is a little more of your traditional healer cleanser with some turn meter buffs as well. She's a very good champion. If you've got Kaja, you don't need to build a Raglan. If you got Raglan, you probably don't need to build a Kaja for the faction. But if you have both of them, then you can probably just walk through with a team of damage and walk through the faction pretty easily. Mentioned Timid already is a protector, Lugan is a protector, Raglan already, Kaja, Marishka. Sathalia is one of the few champs I have not mentioned. Sathalia does a lot of freezing, and she does some cleansing. She is a member of one of the tougher waves in Faction Wars, where there's 3 Sasalias and 2 other champions that also do some cleansing and healing, and it's a very difficult, it's a damage test, really, because you have to do enough damage to kill one of the champions or figure out how to control them well enough that you can start killing 1 or 2 of them before you can move past the wave. She's not a great champion, but she can be useful in Faction Wars for you. Manaya is another champion who's not particularly great. She pairs with one of the Skinwalkers. She's got a decent heal. She's been buffed a little bit, but she's still is not worth investing a lot in. So if you have to invest in her, you invest into 5-star and you hope that she has enough support that you deal with. Adeline is the current login champion as of the filming of this video. Adeline's an okay support. She provides some healing. She can provide some sleep. She can transfer some debuffs from herself to the enemy. It's not the greatest kit. It's honestly, it's targeted for Sand Devil, and even against Sand Devil, it's not perfect. Overall, she is still she's still a healer and provides a decent heal and a few other support tools as well. So she can be useful in a successful Faction Wars team. And since you get her for free, building her to 50 is not the worst thing in the world. Plus, you'll get some ascensions on her, which will help build her as well. So there's that. Finally, Lord Champfort. Lord Champfort is an AoE decrease attack champion. He can do okay damage, but he's more of a protector. He throws shields up as well. He is not the greatest champion in the world, but he's useful. You can put him in stun if you need to. And honestly, he does mitigate a lot of damage with the shields that he gets up every turn. Some provokes you can stick on him, especially if you can get him in like provoke gear or something like that. And then the decrease attack is AoE landing. It can be pretty good. Finally, I don't think I have mentioned Killian the Lucky, and that's intentional. So the Bannerlords get to fight the blue boss. The blue boss is the ally attacking boss that revives his allies, and sleeps himself and throws out fear. He's fortunately fairly straightforward, with the Bannerlords not having a lot of decreased defense or any sort of enhancement. One of the best strategies against this boss is to have decrease attack to get it out there, because this boss with the ally attack will absolutely smack and decimate your team if you don't have the decrease attack on everybody. Now, you can certainly just smack your way through it. Stag is great for this. Dagger is helpful for this as well. Archmage might be able to stun the ads, so you've got some stuff there. You also can even use somebody like a Stultus for stuns. You could certainly put a stun set on somebody who's got an AoE attack, although there's not a lot of really good AoE stunners on this faction. But overall, if you either just outright do enough damage to blow through the boss quickly, or figure out how to survive a couple of attacks, maybe have some healing involved if you can, as well as the decrease attack. Now, revivers are at a premium, so ideally if you have a reviver, that's great. If you don't have a reviver, then you're certainly going to need to lean into the protection more or the damage more to kind of pound your way through it. But overall, the boss is at least fairly simple, so for the faction, it's not as big of a challenge as it could be. As far as where they are, as far as the actual challenge for the faction overall, they're probably mid-tier. They're not hard, they're not easy. So going over my recommendations here again. So we've got Manaya that's actually was added in the protection. I didn't have her listed beforehand. Ulfring is kind of a bit of a protector as well as an enhancer. I don't know if I listed him for that as well. Overall, there's several different champions you could use here. You'll notice there's an awful lot of legendaries on the damage and the protection side. Same for the epics and rares. Really, you're ideally the simplest solution is pull a Stagnite, and Stagnite and Archmage will carry you through a lot of this faction, and then hopefully the rest of your team is pretty flexible. So you really want to bring the decreased defense if you can. So that's where Stagnite or Dagger come in the sample team. Archmage, because you're going to get him, he's a guaranteed champion, so that makes him pretty accessible and easy to bid. If you're hitting Faction Wars early, then you can certainly try to compensate for Archmage with some other champion, but Archmage is a good support for Faction Wars. Giscard or Ulfring would be some good enhancement for you as well. Giscard providing the decrease attack as well as some increased defense so you can survive a little bit more, as well as some provokes, which can be very helpful for clearing the wave. Ulfring bringing some of the increased speed and some healing as well can be very helpful for the support. Then finally, with those three knocked out, hopefully, you take a reviver, whichever reviver you can grab. I mean, Ursula's great, but she's a Void Epic, which is fairly rare still. Obviously, you've got a couple of Void Legos that are not the easiest revivers to get. And then you've got Kaja the Rai, who again is also a legendary. So having her could be hit or miss. Beyond that, take additional damage or protection. So if you don't feel you have enough protection, if you're struggling to get decreased attack out there, or you need some ways like shields to help you out, Valerie is a cheap solution. Sigmund would be great and will help you a ton. Oathbound can bring some protection out there as well. Warcaster is an option. Even Lady A would be an option for you. Otherwise, lots of damage and lots of decreased attack and a little bit of healing, and that'll hopefully help you through the faction. Let's take a look at what I managed to use for it, and maybe that'll inspire you a little bit. So this is my team, and as you see, it took 15 minutes. I don't think it actually took 15 minutes. I think I was doing some other stuff while I was doing some of this, and I did manual a lot of it just because I wanted to manage what I could with the boss. The big problem I have is you'll notice that my damage dealers, being Giscard, Dagger, and Sigmund, are very, very low. They're not, they're all 50s, and that was probably a mistake on my part trying to save resources. Archmage at 60, you can actually see he did the most damage on the team. I didn't even realize that until just looking at that recently. I'm actually impressed that Raglan was number 2 in damage, which is actually kind of scary and surprising. But having a Raglan made this fairly easy. The big part was just making sure that I had everybody alive when I finally killed the boss. Raglan was great for the revive, but a single target revive means I've got to wait for it to refresh before I can revive a second champion if they die, and Dagger is very, very, very squishy. Overall, hopefully this helps you deal with the Bannerlords. Bannerlords, as I said, they're a mid-tier difficulty. They're not too difficult because there's some decent champions in Bannerlords. They're not too easy because some of the good champions are harder to get, and they just don't quite have all the tools you want for the boss. But at least the boss is one of the easier bosses. So I believe in you. I believe you can do it. Hopefully this helps. Until next time, I've been Bront CatHerder.